You're listening to Transformation at Work, your one-stop guide to Salesforce success. And this is Career Corner, your guide to building your career in the Salesforce ecosystem. Our accomplished team of veterans is here to give advice and coaching on Salesforce certifications, the application process, networking, career mapping, and all the things you need to know to advance your expertise at every stage of your journey. In this episode, we're talking about switching careers, namely, what it looks like to go from a Salesforce customer to a Salesforce consultant. It's a natural career step for a lot of professionals, especially those who have been deeply involved in managing Salesforce within their own organizations. After all, if you're looking for a switch, whether that's due to life happening around you or you're just ready for something new, moving into the Salesforce ecosystem it's cool, it's interesting, it's a dynamic industry, it's something you've probably been hands-on with and you've probably seen how it's impacted your company. Then that ability to do that for other businesses, that's a pretty exciting prospect, and if you're starting new, that's a great place to work towards. But the thing is, actually making that switch, moving across the table, so to speak, that can be more than a little intimidating. After all, when you're a customer, you're really just asking the questions. You're showing up to the meeting, you're saying, hey, here's my pain points, and you're trusting your consultants to address those issues. But when you're the consultant, then you've got to answer the questions, and that means knowing what questions to ask. Like, what's their business model? Have they used Salesforce before? Do they answer their questions? Have they used similar technology to work with the big organizations? It just makes you want to scream. It is a lot. And so the $64,000 question becomes, well, how do you manage it? How do you successfully manage that transition and go from being a customer to a truly successful Salesforce consultant? To really answer that question, we sat down with April Bollwage, Gerent's Senior Director of Education and Recruiting, Admissions and International, and Cheryl Gibson, Gerent's Senior Director of Healthcare and Life Sciences for Payers. Both Cheryl and April have decades of experience within their industries, over 20 years of international education experience in April's case, and over 30 years of experience working with major healthcare payers for Cheryl, and have both experienced firsthand the difficult but rewarding journey of transitioning out of their respective fields and into the Salesforce ecosystem. We start our conversation at the very beginning by answering the big question. What was it exactly that made you want to make the switch from customer to consultant? Here's April's answer.
My story probably starts where many people's stories would have started maybe 2 years ago when COVID hit. So my background and my experience have been in international education. I was working in the same organization for about 20 years at that time. And international education took a huge hit during pandemic. International travel stopped, visa restrictions, anything you can imagine affected our industry. And it was a time in my life, and I'm sure everyone's life and their career, it's like, well, if things are changing and the world is changing and this role I had that was based on irreplaceable in-person experiences has now gone digital, what do I do about that? What does that mean for what I loved about my job? What does that mean about where I'm going to be in a few years? What does that mean about the joy I thought I brought to people? Are we really still going to be able to do that? So there was a big fundamental question I had for myself of where I wanted to be and where I would even see my career based on the industry I'd been in. And at the time, there was an opportunity at Gerent to establish a point of view on education, which would really position Gerent uniquely in our space. And having come from kind of that unique niche sort of education area, I had the opportunity to come here and get to talk about education on a whole, education in a way that was different than most providers had been treating education, which was strictly higher ed, maybe a little K-12. This gave us an opportunity to really look at who are the organizations in the education space that are more than schools, more than universities, maybe partners with those schools and partners with universities, and really, because we understood schools and we understand schools at Gerent, and from our past experience we have, we're able to meet with those other types of organizations and bring the education space a bit broader than what happens inside the classroom. Not that that's not super important, but really being able to look at from a larger view and the opportunity for that to look at education as a whole and all the hands that make things happen was really exciting to me. And knowing that I had a safe place to land here at Gerent was super important to me.
Now, April's experience is far from uncommon, right? Life happens to all of us, and honestly, that can be the best inspiration for seeking out something new and exciting. But as Cheryl breaks down here, that's not always the case. Sometimes you just know it's time to move on to something new. Here's Cheryl.
After 30 years working for a large payer and other large corporations, honestly, I was ready to try something new. My passion has always been process improvement, and one of my key strengths is being strategic. And I was fortunate to be introduced to Salesforce about 10 years ago, really liked what I saw. And I was fortunate at my last position at a large payer in which I was allowed to lead the Salesforce strategy for national accounts. And this experience opened my eyes to potential career opportunities. I wanted to help payers to be more efficient, leverage the technology in a meaningful way. And in this manner, I could still use all of my 30 plus years healthcare experience, my knowledge of Salesforce, and really help guide customers on the path to success. And you know what the beauty of this is that I didn't have to worry about securing funding for the project.
That first step into a new industry, especially when you have experience in your old role, is terrifying. Let's call it what it is. That's never going to change. Here's Cheryl with how she experienced it.
A lot of people, even my son, thought I was crazy for walking away from a very large corporation where I had been for years, where things were considered very stable, and going into a totally different career. I had always been the customer, always on the side of the table, from the consultant. And all I had to do was just show up and respond to the questions they asked. I didn't have to worry about preparing for the meetings. I was unfamiliar with some of the key steps behind the methodology and all the roles within the consulting firm that made a project feel like a well-oiled machine.
Once they both made that decision, took that admittedly very scary first step of deciding to look for something new, that's when the real work begins, in the job hunting and interview process. And that comes with the challenge of reimagining your skills and experiences for a new industry and a new context. Let's throw it over to Cheryl for a look at how that felt from her experience.
I really feel for the interviews, I had to reinvent myself in a way, if that makes sense. I had to look at what elements within my healthcare experience and my background would be relevant in consulting. Also, coming from a Salesforce customer perspective, I felt I could lend credibility to potential and existing customers in that, I've been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, so to speak. I have empathy for the customers that others may not possess because I know, having sat in their shoes, how challenging it can be to promote a project of this magnitude within a large organization. And one thing I kept telling myself is that each one of us are given distinct talents that we're born with that cannot be taught. And I think leveraging those within an interview is really important.
But as April breaks down here, some of the most crucial differentiators that you can bring to the table as a customer moving into the consulting industry are, well, they're skills you've already been developing for some time. Here's April.
If you're looking for a more technical role, that will have a very specific skill set and very specific skills you want to portray. But for the most part, this is a relationship business. And you learn that really early on in the process and the implementation, right? You're looking at relationships with your customers or your clients or your students or whoever that may be, and really understanding kind of what your value is and how important the relationships you're going to form with clients and form with partners is what needs to come through in your interview. All this CRM isn't anything without that R part, right? So we need to make sure that we are people of our word, that we are the types of people who will go into a situation to meet a client, to become partners with them, to really get to know who they are. And that piece of it will come through as you're interviewing, right? Let people know what's important to you. Make sure that you are communicating the relationships and the types of people you've worked with. So in this role, I'm working with completely different people than I would have worked at my old school. However, the types of situations, it was, we're buried in the weeds in admissions all the time. We're always looking for the root of something. Communicating that through really ties very closely with business analysis. And there are so many skills that people have that are transferable they don't really realize. You're so used to doing a job in a specific industry, a specific way. And usually until you take a step back, maybe talk to a few friends that are in other industries and say, I've been in this job for 20 years. I can only do this job. And someone will step out. Do you know what you're actually doing? And that is process analysis. You're looking at your business operations. You're looking at the different processes, people, and procedures, and then why things happen. And you take a step back and you're saying, well, I was doing a heck of a lot more than I thought I was. And it took someone else's eyes to help me see that. So understanding the relationships and the work that you've done and being able to apply that to this space. And there's so much more out there depending on your role that you'll be able to link. And sometimes it's breadcrumbs, right? Sometimes it feels like it's a reach, but then you get in a conversation with somebody and you talk about some work that you've done. And that really resonates with them because that might be what a client's going through. It could be one of the current clients are going through, or it could be an area where their company is looking to expand and you have some very interesting perspective in that space.
Now that said, while Cheryl and April both realized that there were undeniable skills and experiences that their past lives as customers allowed them to bring to the table, there's no denying that for anyone switching careers, especially into a space as technically complex and demanding as the Salesforce ecosystem, it's always going to be at least a little bit of a challenge, and there are undeniably new skills that you need to develop to truly make that transition as seamless as possible. Let's throw it to April for more on that.
It can be pretty daunting depending on how much of a shift you're making. So if you're looking at the full landscape and you're finding some of the qualities in the role that you might be lacking. So for example, certification is a big thing here, right? You have to become Salesforce certified. It's really important that you know the product. It gets to a level of technicality that you may never have expected yourself to have to get to. So it's really trying to plot that course. It's being willing to learn. And that's one of those things you can express too, right? Even during the interview process, throughout this entire experience, is I want to learn. But just knowing yourself at that point and knowing what you're capable of doing and what you want to do and what you're willing to do, how much time you're willing to dedicate to it, plot your course, study, learn, watch YouTube videos, learn in ways that you hadn't done before. I was a reader before until I had to read a million Trailheads. Then I started watching YouTube videos. So I need to balance it out. So I think, I've had a really interesting experience in that learning sense of it, and just not shying away from the things that you think will not stick with you, because surprisingly, those acronyms and those words in this culture, they do resonate. And there is some space left in that hard drive that you may not have known was there.
And in Cheryl's case, the biggest challenge in transitioning from being a customer into a consultant was, well, the mind shift associated with being a customer and going, as she puts it, to the other side of the table to become a consultant. Here's how she put it.
I always had the customer viewpoint, and then I needed to look at things from the consulting point of view on how best to advise the customers. All the different workflows, processes, roles that really make an effective implementation. Again, kind of all the behind the scenes that occurs in, preparing for a project. And it's quite an undertaking, but critical for success.
But the other half of that mindset shift, as Cheryl breaks down here, is that yes, there is a change in perspective required when you go from the customer side of the table to the consulting side of the table. But once you accomplish that ability to pull on those experiences is itself a pretty powerful differentiator that offers you some pretty unique advantages. Here's how Cheryl put it.
So my advice would be to jump in. Don't be afraid of trying something new, because I do feel, and, others that may, fall into this category, that, having that customer experience helps to make me a better consultant because I've been on both sides of the fence. For example, first, when you achieve funding, you want to boil the ocean. That was always what I wanted to do. You want to do everything at once for fear that you won't get a second chance. And honestly, I hated the term MVP, which for those of you that don't know, stands for minimum viable product. As in my mind, everything was MVP. And I've come to realize now the importance of building that foundation and starting, at that perspective. My knowledge of the inner workings of a payer is probably what I would consider the most critical, because, there's consultants out there that are very good, that have a very strong knowledge of Salesforce, but they don't have the industry knowledge. And when we meet with payers, we can speak to them in their language, understand their terminology, and also we understand their pain points. And I feel that helps us to be more effective consultants.
And that part is great, because that's when you really connect with people. And it might not even be the same situation, but it's similar. It's like, hey, in international, we did it kind of X, Y, and Z, or we called it this and that. It's that exact same thing. Somebody will snap on a call and do that. And you're like, okay, we're here. Now we got it. Now we're jiving.
When I was working on a previous project about a year ago, and, the chief growth officer at this particular client was debating whether to make some changes to some fields, some pick list values, et cetera. And he said, well, I guess it's really no big deal. It's just, I would like to see it this way. And I shared with them, I said, this is going to be your legacy. This is something that years from now, when we leave you and you are using this platform, you want this to be something special that you have created that is going to be sustainable. And I encouraged him. I said, it's okay to be picky and to want something special because again, it's long lasting and it outlives when the consultant is there working with the client. For me to walk away from a project and know that you have made a difference in their lives brings me the most satisfaction.
In an odd way, I think when the technology takes a back seat is where I find it super interesting and rewarding too. So I know that that's what got us into the relationship with a partner in the first place. That's what got myself to become a client with the technology and that solution. But when you really start to align with a partner and you understand what their mission is and it aligns really well with yours, and we get that perfect, that trifecta of technology, people, and mission to align, it's amazing because aside from the licensing and aside from the functionalities, we're helping people's day be better. We're helping people who have worked in a really complicated way for years and years and years and process on top of process. We're helping that get better and we're helping people make a difference. And in education and in our nonprofit space, I think it's even more important.
And of course, making that mindset shift is a whole lot easier when you realize, as April did, that you're not the only one doing it. Here's April with a little bit more on the power that comes from that sense of community and solidarity.
So I thought I was super unique. Like I was this unicorn of a person who kind of knew the business and was kind of friendly with IT and kind of got it. There were so many me's, like every project that I've been on, every sales cycle that I've been in, I'm like, oh, that's the me. Like that's my person right there. They're the one who's stuck somewhere between leadership, somewhere between IT, trying to get these requirements together, trying to make a case for why this is important. And once you see your eyes kind of lock on a call and you kind of know, those are the moments that I love because you'll get it. Oh, April, you get me. And then you feel like, okay, yes, I can do this. I know what I'm talking about. I know that I can do this. I know that I can help this partner.
Which brings us to the present day, right? April and Cheryl have successfully made the transition from customer to consultant. Their journey is complete. They're settled into their new roles. The difficult part of making that shift is behind them. But crucially, if you asked either one what advice they would give to themselves when they were starting out the journey or to someone else considering making the transition, their answer was more or less the same.
I absolutely would have done it sooner. I would have taken a lot of the skills that I had. I would have been younger. My brain would have been a little bit faster. But for the most part, I would have done it sooner.
Don't be afraid to look for something new. And I would say you have to follow your passion. You have to enjoy what you're doing because life's too short. We spend too many hours at work and to not feel like we're making a difference. And every job I've been at, I love the saying that you bloom where you're planted. Sometimes we don't know where we're going to end up and it may not be where we initially thought, but it is rewarding and it's important that you be happy in what you do. Relax. You've got this.
Look, job hunting, it's awful. I'm not going to mince words with you. It's one of my least favorite things in the universe. It is terrifying, it is exhausting, it is stressful, especially when you are dealing with the question, can I transition out of my existing role as a customer into the Salesforce ecosystem as a consultant? However, as April and Cheryl both broke down here, if you're seriously considering it and you put in the work to accept that mindset shift and to identify your skills and grow the areas that you need to grow, then once you've done all of that and once you've made that transition, there's very likely going to come a point where you look back and you realize there was no other choice that you could have made. And being able to do that, to look back at the progress you've made coming into a new chapter in your life, that's a pretty powerful and special thing. This has been Transformation at Work. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you again to Cheryl Gibson and April Bolwage for some absolutely incredible insights and powerful stories during this episode. Transformation at Work is, as always, produced by Gerent in collaboration with Salesforce. I am Jeff Stormer, your host and producer. If you enjoyed the show, consider leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify, or head to gerent.com to sign up for email updates when we release new episodes. Until next time, thank you again for listening, and we hope to see you again soon.